Alright, so in this lab we're going to be doing some pipe threading. We're going to have to thread the missing pipe here to build our piping design here that we have on this piece of paper. So from center to center we want this to be 16 inches, and from center to the end of the cap here we want this to be 9.5 inches. To do that we're going to have to figure out how long to cut these pieces of pipe here. Alright, so to figure out how long these pieces of pipe, these half-inch pieces of pipe need to be, we need to figure out what the fitting allowance is here for the fittings, for the center to center measurement. So for our thread engagement here, if we look over here we have this table. It talks about thread engagement, or how many threads, approximate number of threads to engage here for a half-inch pipe. This is for NPT, National Pipe Thread. It has a tapered thread. You can see up here it kind of shows how it tapers in, and that helps provide the seal. We're looking here on our chart, the nominal pipe size 1/2 inch, and we go over, we need to make 10.5 threads, and the approximate length of those 10.5 threads are going to be 3/4 of an inch. And so knowing that we need 10.5 threads, and with hand tight we should be able to engage 4.5 threads, and we're going to be using a pipe wrench to engage the remaining 3, so that's 7.5 threads. That means out of the total 10.5 we'll have approximately 3 left. So when we're done tightening it we should be able to see three threads approximately, and the 7.5 threads, if we were to figure this out and do the math, the 7.5 threads from the 10.5, if we have a total of 3/4, works out to be approximately 1/2 inch. So you're going to have about 1/2 inch of threads here engaged. So if we look back over here, our thread engagement is going to be about 1/2 inch for 1/2 inch pipe. So if we know that, if we know the thread engagement here, we can then measure what they call the throw, which is from the center of the fitting out to the face of the fitting, and subtract this 1/2 inch. And that's going to give us our fitting allowance, the remaining amount here. So if I'll grab a tape measure and we'll have a look at and measure the throw of our fittings. So I have a tape measure here on our 90, and you can see down here the tape measure is in about the center of the fitting at the bottom there, and at the top there to the face it's about 1 1/8 of an inch there, you can see. So that gives us our throw. And now if we go and subtract 1/2 inch from that, we are going to have 5/8 of an inch left over, so that should give us our fitting allowance here of 5/8 of an inch. Alright, so I've written those measurements down here, the key one here being the 5/8 of an inch, because now from our center to center measurement of 16 inches here, every spot that we have a fitting here, we will need to subtract off this fitting allowance here to figure out how long each one of these half-inch pipes needs to be to get this to be 16 inches center to center. So for this one here, we would need to we got 1, 2, 3, 4 of these, so 5/8 times 4, subtract that off, and then we have 2, so we divide that by 2. I also wanted to point out the throw here for the T and the throw here for the 90 are going to be the same, but the throw here for these caps are going to be different. I'm going to leave that up to you to figure out how to determine what that's going to be, what our fitting allowance is going to be for this guy. So you have to measure that throw when you're in the lab to figure that out. Alright, so this is our pipe threader that we're going to be using for threading our pipe. Some things that I wanted to point out to operate it, or to get it to work, we have a foot pedal down here. Right now I have the switch for the threader in the off position, but when we go to use it we want to have it in the forward position here, so it's ready to go now. And when I push on the foot pedal down here, you can hear it operate, and you can see up here it's turning our pipe here. So we want to make sure that we're not using the threader, that we have this switch in the off position, so if someone comes by or anyone touches this pedal that it doesn't turn and they're maybe accidentally leaning on here, and we don't want them to get wrapped up in the machine basically. So that's kind of the first safety concern that I wanted to point out, is that switch there. So what we're going to do first, I have the pipe in place here. It has a chuck. We kind of hammer it grips the pipe, the chuck right here you can see. And so if I just kind of hit it and back it off here, then I can now move the pipe around. And then when I want to clamp it again, I just take the wheel and I hammer it into place, and now the pipe is secured, and the threader can then turn the pipe. We have three tools on the thread that we're going to be using here. We have a cutter, the actual threader right here that has the die for half inch pipe, and then also our reamer on the end here to knock off any burrs off the pipe after we cut it. So what we'll do first is we'll go ahead, we've got a piece of pipe in here, it's already been cut. You can see there's some burrs on the pipe, and I'm going to use the reamer to remove those burrs. So on the back side of the threader right here, we also have kind of like a chuck or holder to hold the pipe, and it's just by rotating it, you can see it will then clamp down onto the pipe, so that we're kind of holding it in 2 points when we're doing the threading. And that way it's not kind of flopping around on the back here. All right, so you can see I've already got some oil dripping on the floor right here, so we're going to make sure we have absorbent pads down here near the front of the threader before we use them, just so we're not making as much of a mess. All right, so I'll put the switch into forward position here. Right down here we've got a wheel that we can use to move the reamer back and forth. You can see this wheel right here. So we'll put all the other tools up, they're already up, and we'll bring the reamer down here into place. And then when we are reaming out the pipe here, we're going to use this wheel, this hand wheel, and apply pressure. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and turn this on. It'll be kind of loud. What I'm going to be doing is pushing the foot pedal and then applying pressure with the wheel here to ream out the pipe. So we'll have a look, and I'll bring you a little bit closer to see that. So there, if we look closer now, you can see that we've knocked off most of the burrs. There's just a few kind of filings and stuff remaining. We can kind of knock those off, and you can see that the pipe has been. All right, so our next step here is going to be threading the pipe, and we'll bring our table back up over here. We have our table. You can see we said that the approximate length of thread to be cut for 1/2 inch, and this table's for NPT thread. You can see down there, it's a tapered thread. The approximate thread length needs to be 3/4 inch with 10.5 threads cut. So that's what we're going to be aiming for here, is 3/4 inch. So we'll measure that after we're done threading here. So I'll bring you back over to the threader, and the gauge to know if once we've reached that 3/4 inch is if you look here on the pipe, on the die, the last tooth there, once it reaches that last tooth on the thread, you can see, that's when we want to disengage the threader. So just to demonstrate here, I'm going to hit the foot pedal, and we'll see it turn. When I let off, you can see it keeps turning for, I don't know, close to half to a full revolution. So to avoid over threading our what I'm going to do is put down the die and just lift up the reamer here because we're not using it. To avoid over threading, we have this release right here. So as soon as we'll be watching that, and as soon as the pipe gets to the end, we'll just kick out the release and it will pull the die away. You can see right here. So we want this down. We want the die down as far as it can go to actually do the threading. I'll just kind of move it in here with the wheel over here, close, and we want to kind of be applying some pressure. And then I'll be continuously applying pressure for about, once it starts grabbing, after it's starts making about 2 or 3 threads, we can stop applying pressure, and then the machine will kind of just take over, and it'll just keep threading the pipe. But once we get to the end here, to the last tooth, I'm going to lift this handle up to open up the die, and it'll stop threading instantly. So and then it doesn't matter now if when I let off the foot pedal that it keeps turning. So we'll start threading this piece of pipe now. And there, I let off the wheel. I lifted up, I opened up the die and let off the pedal, and we'll just slide this out here. So once we reached that last tooth there, once the last tooth cut into the pipe, I opened up the die, and if we have a look there, there's our threads. So I'll go and grab the tape measure, we'll measure and see if that's 3/4 of so I've got the tape measure on it. It's kind of upside down, but if you look, you can see the 1 there for 1 inch, and you can see that we are right at 3/4 of an inch in our thread. So how about we count those threads and see if we've got close to 10. If we kind of have a look here, looks like the threads started right about here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we have 10 and maybe a little bit, about 10.5 threads there. So that's perfect. That's how much we wanted to thread the pipe. If we over thread the pipe or under thread the pipe, then we won't have consistency in our thread engagement, and then our piping measurements will be way out. So we want to make sure that we're consistently producing this this length of thread, 3/4. All right, so I'm just about to cut this nipple here, right here, is nipple or piping piece of pipe, and we need to subtract from the 16. We need to subtract 5/8 4 times. So that ends up being 2.5 inches. So 2.5 inches off of 16 puts us at 13.5. So 13.5 inches, and we need 2 of those. So 13.5 divided by 2 puts us at 6 3/4. So we want both of these to be 6 inches and 3/4 of an inch. So we'll go ahead and cut our first chunk of pipe there to 6 3/4. Right, so the first thing I'm going to need to do is loosen off the chuck here, so I just back it off and then slide the piping out. So we have enough, and just keep in mind we can move the cutter back and forth with this hand wheel down here, and then we will tighten this back into place. And what we're going to do is use the tape measure and measure from the end here to our cutting to the cutter over here, to the wheel on the cutter, and make sure that it's at 6 3/4 of an inch. All right, so using the handle and the cutting wheel here, if I just snug it up, you can see it kind of tightened up there, and we'll just quickly grab the tape measure here and check to see if we are still. I want to make sure before. I want to measure twice, cut once. Looks like we're still, oops, over here. Yep, we're still at 6 3/4 of an inch, so I'll go ahead and cut this. So just put this in the forward position and press the foot pedal. And I'll firmly apply pressure on our handle of the cutting wheel. So you can see as I apply pressure, it slowly presses down, the wheel presses down and pinches into the pipe. Alright, so we're just about to the end here. I had to switch and use 2 hands. And there, once the pipe falls off, we can just take our foot off the pedal and shut it into the off position before we grab the pipe. Right, because there's so much oil used for the threading part, the pipe will probably have quite a bit of oil on it, so we want to use a rag when we're grabbing it so it's not dripping all over the floor. We can kind of wipe it off before we flip it around and then thread the other side. So to speed things up, I'd recommend, rather than just flipping it around and threading the other side, we start all over and start cutting and making our next pipe. So we want to ream, thread, and cut this, and then once we have all of our joints cut, we can take our length out of the machine and do each of the other pieces of pipe, do the other side of them and thread them, ream them and thread them. All right, so when we flipped our 6 3/4 inch pipe around here, and just to note, I don't know if you can see it back in there, you can kind of see the threads. We want to make sure that our chuck isn't biting down on those. So there's kind of a minimum length that we can do here. We're pretty close to it, but we want to make sure we have this out as far as we can, so when we do bring down the reamer here, that it doesn't, if you look here, the tools here only can slide to about here. So looks like we'll be good still, but just take note of that the positioning of this pipe here, you need to ensure you have enough out here so that the reamer will actually function. All right, so we have our 6 3/4 inch pipe threaded and ready to go on both sides. Now I just need to grab some Teflon tape and wrap it clockwise. 2 wraps around the pipe, and then we can put our first fitting on. Right, so I have the 90-degree fitting here. I'm just gonna thread it on first. Says we should be able to do about 4.5 threads from hand tight, and then I'll grab a pipe wrench and thread the remaining 3 threads. We should have about 3 threads left over, or about 1/4 inch of threads. Alright, so I have a pipe wrench right here, maybe a little bit big for what we need here. It's an 18-inch pipe wrench, 12-inch, maybe be a little bit better. But you can see here on the pipe wrench it's got, it can be resized, right? So we want to make sure it's sized appropriately for our fitting. So that's about right. And we want to turn this clockwise. And we should be able to turn it 2 or 3 times here. Go to about there, and we'll just have a look to see how many threads we have left. So it's hard to see, but looking at the bottom here, we have about 1, 2, 3 threads showing there. And if we were to hold our tape measure up here, where is it? There it is. We have close to, if we look at the 1 and then going backwards, it's about 1/4 inch of thread showing. So that's about right there. All right, so now what I'm going to do is attach the T here and all the remaining, cut the rest of the pipe and thread it, and build everything that was shown on that piping diagram. So I'm about halfway done here. I just wanted to point out, I did have the chain vise strapped over here, but since I've added the T, I've moved it. So you want to make sure you have this chain vise strapped on and holding the pipe where you're going to be doing your threading, because if you start to tighten this, it might start to spin your T over here and things won't all line up. So make sure you're strapping this appropriately, putting it in a spot so other things don't move here. These other threaded fittings don't move, so we can get this one orientated the way we want. Alright, so I'm just about finished here. I'm just working on my end caps here, putting those on, and just wanted to show a little bit more operation on that pipe wrench here. I'm just going to size it up, and the nice thing about a pipe wrench, didn't point this out before, is it has these teeth here, and as I push down, when I come back up, the teeth stop biting. So as I'm pushing down, the teeth will bite, and then they'll stop biting. Just need to make sure you have it sized appropriately, so then it can kind of bite onto the pipe or the fitting, and just push down and keep doing that until you have enough threads engaged. So you can see there's the teeth marks from the pipe wrench biting onto the fitting. You just want to be careful. You can get almost a metal sliver from that too. Sometimes the pipe wrench will kind of bite down and kind of mash the fitting, so just be aware of that. Alright, so there's our finished product. What we're going to do now is pressure test it. I guess just before we do that, we'll kind of have a quick check here. I'll just grab the tape measure and we'll just check center to center here. This should be 16 inches, center to center. We've got that marked over there right on the center of the pipe, and then over here you can see, yep, we're right at 16 inches. And then we also look at our diagram up here, 9.5 inches from the center of the 90 up top there down to the end of the cap. So I'll just place this. Yep, we're pretty close to the center. And I'll just look down here. And yeah, we're pretty close to, looks like 9.5. Just double check 9.5 there. And yeah, pretty well the center of the fitting there, so we're good. So we'll go ahead and pressure test this. Okay, so I have this hooked up to our water lines here and pumped it up with our pump, and it's sitting here at 100 psi, and I've blocked it all in now, and we're just waiting to see if the pressure is dropping. And it's been there for about a minute or so, so should be no leaks. I don't see any water dripping out of any of the fittings, so looks like everything's good. So we pressure tested this for 100 psi. So not all piping, depends on what it's rated for, depends on what the maximum working pressure is going to be, but we've just decided in this situation we're going to go to 100 psi. So it looks like all of our fittings have held and all of our threaded joints have held, so we're good to go. Right, so our last step is going to be to disassemble everything, take the fittings off. We're going to discard the piping and keep the fittings for the next group. All right, and just to point out, we're going to be going counterclockwise now to loosen off. All right, so I've got it all disassembled. Piping's going to go in our scrap metal bin, and our fittings are going to save for another. So for our cleanup here, we're going to be, can't really see it too much, there's a little bit of oil here on the floor. We're going to be cleaning that up with a mop. We've got a mop here in the lab that we'll be using to clean that up, and then also over near the threader here, we've also got a little bit of oil on the floor as well, so we're going to want to be cleaning that up. And then last but not least, we want to make sure we get all the filings and stuff. You can see there's lots of filings here. We want to knock those all loose down into the drip tray down here on the bottom. and then this drip tray just removes out, and we'll be dumping that into our filings bin to clean up all the threaders. And you can see we've got lots over here as well. So I want to knock that all off and clean it all up. And of course we're going to have it in the off position while we're cleaning it. So once it's in the off position, we can use a rag and just kind of clean up all the oil and stuff on the threader and knock all the filings back down. I want to leave the equipment how we found it.